Hello and welcome to Good Morning Sibos. I'm Nadine DeReza.
And I'm Stephen Chia. It's day 3 of Sibos 2017 right here in Toronto. And I hope those of you who took part in the fun run a little bit earlier this morning are now nicely warmed up and raring to go.
Well, I did have an application form for you, Stephen.
Oh,
but I forgot to hand it in.
Such a pity.
I know. And fun and run don't usually go together, do they? But I did see people out and about having fun. Well, here on SibosTV, we've got all the big interviews and debates here in the studio, and we're broadcasting the key sessions as they happen across the convention centre.
In Good Morning Sibos, we will preview the day ahead with our regular panel of journalists.
And Talking Cyber starts at 11:15. And I'm going to be down, Stephen, on the exhibition floor, tapping into the vibe from the Inno Tribe.
I
There's
like
a good
that.
vibe down there.
The Inno Tribe vibe.
Yeah.
And at 11, we'll bring you the big issue debate. And today, that explores the future of money with experts from the world of finance and beyond.
And at 1 p.m, we're back with Lunch with Sibos, when the menu includes the latest in our Game Changer series. And that's a nice interview with Stephen and the subject, quantum computing.
Oh, that's a big one. I learned so much from that interview. At 3 p.m, join us for Sibos Today. We'll feature the big interview. And we have Liv Mostre, CEO of the Euroclear Group.
We start right now with our look ahead to the business of the day with our panel of journalists. And today we're delighted to welcome James Bradshaw, who's the banking reporter for the Globe and Mail here in Toronto.
We're also joined by Jennifer Sertle, writer for the Huffington Post and long-time Sibos attendee.
And of course, Chris Hall, editor of Sibos Issues, and a familiar face on our couch. Welcome to you all.
Welcome, welcome.
Thanks for having us.
James, so this is your first time here at Sibos. Going to ask you, what have you noticed, what have you found most interesting so far?
Well, thanks for having me. It's the first thing you notice is just the sheer scale of it. You know, Toronto's a pretty good center for banking and hub for banking, but just to have this number of people from all over the banking world sort of come and congregate here has been a really interesting thing. I think one of the things that's really nice is that there's not just, like a lot of conferences, one panel on blockchain or one panel on financial crime, but there's these overlapping and interlocking panels and sessions and mixers on the topics. So if there's an issue you want to go really deep on, you can kind of weave your way through the conference and keep coming back to it that way. And so I've spent a lot of time on a couple of topics in particular and found that really helpful.
Well, good to have you here. And Jennifer, I know we were chatting beforehand. Yes. You've been to a few Ciboses before. I think 3, was this your 4th one?
I think this is the 3rd.
The 3rd one,
yes.
Okay. So what do you see as the top stories, in particular when it comes to technology and innovation? Because that's one of the key areas of your focus.
Yeah, I think like when I began to come, it was the castle and the sandbox, and the sandbox was over here and the castle was enormous. And so what I'm seeing now is that almost everyone is talking about blockchain and capability. And that's, it's new to see it across the board, to see it there. And so I think people are looking more for talent. People are looking more towards inclusion. I'm seeing many more women speaking, leading panels, facilitating. So it's, I think inclusion and capacity and capability are the themes that I'm seeing.
And do you see that sort of combination of technology and the human element coming together as well? Do people understand that there is a balance to be struck?
Yeah, I think the technology still needs people, and like in healthcare, even if Watson can detect cancer quicker, there still should be a human being there to actually say, here's the situation. So yeah, absolutely. It's great to see technology is actually making us more human again.
Yeah, and increasingly I think that's the debate, talking about not just the technology, but how it actually applies to us in our daily lives, and how the point we're working towards is where it's seamless, where you go in a room, you flick a light switch, it comes on. You don't even think about it. And I think that's where we're working towards. Well, Chris, highlights perhaps from yesterday's sessions and what you attended.
Well, I spent a lot of time in the financial crime compliance sessions, and some of the themes about that, the role of the humans, the role of the machines, was really kind of central to all the panel sessions yesterday in that particular stream, where issues such as kind of sanctions screening are a particular theme. Sanctions put on rogue states and certain governments are clearly part of the kind of foreign policy toolbox for the foreseeable future, but compliance with those sanctions is getting more incredibly complicated. It's they're getting updated all the different times. Each different government, and sometimes even different government departments, have different kind of sanctions lists for banks to comply. How do they kind of do that effectively, cost effectively? Banks have been throwing bodies at it for quite some time. That is unsustainable, everyone agrees. But how much control you let the robots have, the AI. It's really kind of up to it. I don't think there is an agreement on that yet.
And we're on that sort of inflection point, aren't we? We need to make some serious questions and challenges of how much we hand over to AI and get that balance right as well. Thank you very much, Chris. Now, James, what are you here to report about then?
We're reporting on whatever we find, really. I've spent a lot of time so far on two issues. One is financial crime as well, and I do think that the balance between AI and the potential for that is really interesting, but also the human element, because one of the things I keep hearing is that at some stage it's always got to pass through a human being, and the regulators have to be comfortable with how far we're going to go with this, because some of these technologies can get awfully predictive, awfully invasive. They can connect dots that wouldn't otherwise easily be connected, and that's going to bump up against privacy rules a lot. The other thing we're paying a lot of attention to, which I think came up in the opening plenary with Dave Mackay, who's the CEO of Royal Bank of Canada, the largest bank here, was just the way the new battleground for banks is going to be data and what they do with that. And this comes back to what you were saying earlier about the importance of figuring out the human element of it, because I think banks have always had a lot of data about their customers. They haven't always deployed it very well, partly because they didn't know how to, and partly because there are laws and privacy regulations that prevent them from doing that in certain cases. I think they're understanding now that they have to be able to listen better to the signals that their customers send out into the digital ether over social media and through other channels, and try and understand what they need, anticipate what they're going to need, get context aware about where they're going to be if they're in a particular neighborhood. Say, do you want to see a house? Things like that. But you can very easily cross a line. I talked to one company that talked about working with a credit card company where they did a pilot, and they were able to predict with some accuracy a likely divorce 6 months before it happened because of people's spending patterns, because of the things people start spending money on before that kind of a life event. And you can really cross over into dangerous territory. And I think all over the world, with things like Wells Fargo, but also here in Canada, there have been concerns raised about sales practices among the banks. Nothing as systemic or concerning as what we saw with Wells Fargo. But I think banks are bumping up against a situation where, as they know more about their customers, they can do more and try and push more products and try and offer more services. But you can really cross a line where people start to feel very
That is really interesting. And in fact, it could be for or against that, because if you can predict that possibly a divorce could happen, you could send the person for counseling. So there are advantages to it, but it's again, where do you draw the line,
so
right?
kind,
I mean,
isn't he?
I'm looking at both sides of the
good
coin.
sign.
That's a glass half full.
Yeah, exactly. Actually, on the show, we'll be talking about bio-identity and biometrics. Again, that's another level of, how secure is it? And I think later on I'll be interviewing someone on that. But Jennifer, your take, because we know geopolitics and finance, very hard to separate increasingly. What is your take on that?
Well, I think the sad part is that you actually have to be informed to make wise decisions. And I think we're very privileged to be here, and we're hungry for knowledge. And I think that part of participation is the knowledge piece. And I think there's a lot of people that are not savvy here. So I think I'm concerned about how do we scale the learning to mainstream. So that's what I'm deeply concerned about.
Absolutely. And when you mentioned about financial crime compliance, just taking the topic financial crime, that's a huge area of interest as well. So all of you to contribute on this one, in particular hacking stories. They're not going away, and if any business or organisation thinks they're not going to be hacked, then they're being very naive, and it doesn't matter how many controls you're putting in place. It is very difficult to outbeat the cyber criminals. So how much attention do you put in your newspaper to hacking and financial crime?
We try to pay a lot of attention to it. It's a difficult topic to report on because, as you might imagine, institutions are reticent to tip their hands too much on what they are doing, where their blind spots may be. You don't want to tell the hackers where to look. I think one of the real fears is that financial institutions are only sort of as strong as the weakest link. That if one financial institution gets compromised, it's a reputational problem and a trust problem for all of them. So we look a lot at it, and I think you see a lot of things happening. We have one bank, Toronto Dominion Bank, TD Bank here, which has just struck a partnership with an Israeli firm that they think is really at the forefront of cyber defense, and they're basically going to set up an office in Tel Aviv and try and be on the leading edge, try and see what are the biggest threats that are coming and what are the best technologies and the best partners they might have for addressing that. But I think there's also a big conversation that's going on about how much they can talk to each other about it. And we've started to see initiatives. I reported on something called the Canadian Cyber Threat Exchange, the CCTX, which is a new initiative with banks, but also power companies, telcos, some of the really big sort of network infrastructure companies where they're trying to talk more in a safe way, in a way that doesn't compromise privacy, and also talk to our spy agencies. So they're talking to the CSE, which is our version of the NSA, if you like, to get that kind of downstream data on what the threats are going to be, because they're really serious.
And Jennifer, from your point of view, when it comes to hacking and cybercrime, anything around the inner tribe area that caught your eye that can address this?
I think everyone's talking about identity and your ability to protect your identity. And so I think that the approach in InnoTribe is much more about what can individuals do to protect themselves, and not so much the systemic protection. But I think it's an issue and we need to actually build more space for it. But people are afraid to talk about scary things.
Yep.
Yeah.
But that's a conversation we need to have, because increasingly with technology, it'll be more invasive, more intrusive. And as I said, it can be good or bad, right? So how do we strike the balance? Chris?
I mean, the information sharing conversation is a central one to financial crime compliance. And that goes between, I mean, everyone knows that the more that we're able to share information, and best practice, then the better we're able to kind of keep up with the bad guys, I guess. But there's issues not only between banks, but between banks and the regulators and the kind of law enforcement authorities. There has to be trust between those three very different entities, because banks need to be able to trust that they're not going to be landed with a huge fine for when they kind of pass on potential information. And right now there is not the kind of feedback loop that actually helps the banks improve, because quite often they're sending kind of suspicious transaction reports into a void. Yeah. They don't know what happens to
Okay, well, let's look ahead to today. Jennifer, what are you looking forward to, first of all?
My 10-year-old, when he was 4 years old, he said, "Mom, does your heart remote control people?" And it was the first time that I ever realized that he would never know the difference between virtual and reality. And so I'm looking forward to being less afraid of that reality.
So augmented reality,
yeah,
the combination of the two comes together.
Absolutely, and where, I love the point that you made, because there's a paradox between we're being forced and asked to be more transparent and more collaborative, and at the same time, there's more fear around what's being shared. So how do we navigate that paradox?
Yep.
Yeah,
Chris, very briefly, what are you looking forward to today?
Well, certainly I think the big issue debate at 11 o'clock on data and identity has to be the kind of key thing for everyone today.
Yep. James?
I'm interested in open banking and APIs and where that can take us, and I think that comes back to the exact same question, which is that I think banks, with the trust they have, are looking at whether they can be the gatekeepers to that digital identity, but we're also moving to a world where it's going to be much easier for clients to move around and move their products to other financial institutions, and I think that's got huge implications for the system as a whole.
Well, thank you very much. And there you go, James. There's your guide for today, just in case you need one. They're really good handouts, actually, because if you go for Sibos issues, you've got a whole centre
we got to up the ante. It's a Sibos app. You've got to download that.
That's
old school.
I have the Sibos app. It's been very helpful.
Thank you very much
all
for your
coming
comments
in
today.
Thanks for having us.
Well, as Canada celebrates its 150th birthday this year, one of its most respected authors has published a new book looking at what makes this country tick.
It's called The Promise of Canada, Q Book, and looks back down those 150 years, focusing on the stories of 9 Canadians who helped define the country. The author is Professor Charlotte Gray, and she spoke to me at her book signing here at Sibos. Well, thank you very much, Charlotte, for joining us on SibosTV. In your book, The Promise of Canada, you look at 9 people who've shaped Canadian history over the last 150 years. Why did you choose those 9 individuals? What unites them?
Well, what I was looking for, Nadine, was people who have fed into the collective psyche of Canadians over the last 150 years and left us a wonderful legacy. So one was an artist, Emily Carr, who made us look at the landscape. Tommy Douglas, the man who introduced the healthcare system here at a time when most people couldn't afford proper healthcare. And then one was a populist politician from the West, Preston Manning, who demanded more balance between the centre of Canada and the provinces. So each of them sort of shifted the balance in Canada away from colonialism and towards the diverse country we are today.
When you compare with what's going on in Europe and the United States of America, immigration has become a dirty word, a negative word. So how has Canada's increasing diversity shaped it?
Well, remember that although in fact there have always been indigenous people here, they are 5% of the population. The rest of us are all immigrants. I'm an immigrant, as you might tell from my accent. So there's a sort of sense of immigration is not negative. Immigration is positive. It's going to grow the population of this country. It's going to make it more sort of globally acute. So immigration is regarded as a strength as long as it's controlled. Canada has always been able to control its borders in a way that Europe and the US haven't been able to. This is nothing terribly smart about Canadians. It's to do with geography.
Well, thank you so much for coming along on SibosTV.
My pleasure.
Well, that was Charlotte Gray speaking to me earlier this week at the Swift Institute. And this has been the worst kept secret.
Yeah.
I got you a copy of the book, and it's signed by her,
Oh,
Stephen.
wow.
And I know you've got a long journey back to
Thank
Singapore.
you, yes.
It's a beautifully written book. It's very conversational.
Looking forward to reading it.
Yeah, and I think because you spent 4 years here, it will really mean a lot to you. I've
It's
also
been
got
a
another
Yeah.
copy. I've got no more pocket money left. I'm going to have to save up. And this is for Leo, our lovely floor manager. I just want to say thank you to
Thank
him
you
for
so
being
much,
an
and thank
amazing
you,
guy. And
Charlotte, for writing
there you
this
go. I'll
and for
give that to
signing
him later. He's too shy to come on camera. Anyway, cybercrime is a big topic here at Sibos, but despite the electronic security systems banks have in place, almost all successful cyber attacks involve someone on the inside.
And sometimes the insider is a previously loyal employee who has become malicious, but that's not always the case.
So to find out more about the human element of cyber attacks and what banks can do to protect themselves, we spoke to a world-leading expert, Dr. Jessica Barker.
And we started by asking her why most cyber attacks involve an insider.
Well, it's really because it's people on the inside with the information, with the access to the information or to the funds. So if you are an external attacker and you wish to attack a company, it's much easier, much quicker, much cheaper, much more effective, much less risky to compromise a human on the inside of an organization than it is to attack the technology, the network, the computer. So that's one angle of this. Another perspective, of course, is those people on the inside who are malicious actors themselves, who maybe have a grudge against the company. And of course, then they have a great deal of access that they are able to exploit. And then we have the non-malicious insider, the accidental insider, who is maybe sharing information inappropriately, who is coerced into a social engineering attack on the company, or who is leaking information without even realizing it.
And which happens more often, the one with malicious intent or the unknown participant?
It is really the unknown participant, the accidental insider. So when we look at insider activity, the malicious insider is a much smaller proportion of the problem compared to the non-malicious insider. But of course, a malicious insider can be a really costly attack for an organization. If somebody is working for you and they are determined to attack you from the inside, then they can do that with really devastating results.
And why do you think people fall for social engineering attacks like phishing emails? I mean, people seem to fall for those all the time.
Yep, it's really because of how those attacks are crafted. I mean, I think one element, even before we get to that, is that people don't like to think that other people are malicious. And this seems to be especially the case on the internet. So we can take too many things at face value. But also we've seen an increase in sophistication of these kind of social engineering attacks. So particularly when we think about spear phishing emails, which are phishing emails that are targeted at individuals, they will be using your name, they will be potentially using personal information about you, about the person that is supposedly sending the email. It might look like it comes from your boss, a friend, a trusted organization. So all set up to look much more convincing. And then using psychological triggers like greed, authority, temptation, all of these classic things, curiosity, that we know psychologically make us more mindless, make us not think rationally and act more impulsively.
In fact, we had done a test on one of the shows I worked on previously. We got them to create an email to send out to all the company to say, there's something wrong with your paycheck. And click on this link to find out. And many did because it was something that hit home, right?
Sure.
Did you?
Well, I was behind the test, so we knew. But what about insiders who act maliciously? I mean, the intent there, what's their motivation?
So we can look to the kind of classic fraud triangle, or what's been developed to be Crow's Pentagon, which is a model that really explains why people become malicious insiders. So you may have somebody working in an organization, they may have been loyal up to a certain point in their career, and then there will be a pressure, there will be an opportunity, there will be a justification, and then there will be a level of arrogance and competence. And all of these factors at play can turn somebody who has been loyal into a malicious insider. So a pressure, you can think about maybe their partner's been made redundant, maybe they have debts from somewhere. An opportunity, they need access to the information or to the funds. Then there will be the justification, the rationalization, which is really crucial. That is somebody feeling like they've been picked over for promotion, or they haven't been rewarded for their efforts. So they won't even feel like a criminal, they will feel like a victim. And then they have to be a certain level of arrogance and competence for them to actually carry out the attack.
So are people the weakest link when it comes to a bank's cyber security system?
So we hear this narrative a lot. People are the weakest link.
Is it true?
And I would say absolutely not. They're the weakest link in terms of cybersecurity, in terms of our understanding from a cybersecurity point of view of how people behave. We have for so long looked at cybersecurity as a technical problem that we haven't understood psychology, we haven't understood behaviors, we haven't even really understood very well how to raise awareness and get people engaged in cybersecurity. So it may be our weakness, but I would never blame people for making a mistake.
But one could say it is kind of a human weakness, because the bad guys have learned how to trick us, how to pull the wool over our eyes, so in a way, and we're falling for it.
Sure, but they're using classic psychological tricks that are as old as time. And as an industry, from a cybersecurity point of view, we should have the same level of understanding of those tricks, and we should be able to offset the risk. But I often say cyber criminals have a better understanding of psychology than we in the cybersecurity industry do. And that's really our failing.
So what signs should banks look for when they're trying to identify all these different insider threats?
So the first thing, absolutely crucial, is knowing what good looks like. And this is from both a technical and a behavioral point of view. So what does good or what does normal look like on your network? How does traffic usually flow? When is most downloads happening? And then if you see a download of information out of hours or a spike at a time you wouldn't expect it, that might be one trigger to look into. Or machines connecting to share data that wouldn't normally connect. But then there are behavioral indicators as well, and this might be somebody reluctant to take holiday because they don't want anyone logging onto the system under their credentials and discovering what they've been up to. Or it might be somebody who suddenly seems to have a lot more money than they did. Or it might be a staff member who was really engaged with their team suddenly seeming disengaged, maybe because they feel guilty. Or somebody usually disengaged who are much more engaged, and maybe they're trying to get access through the other people. So it's understanding what normal looks like, but also understanding that all of those things I went through, they could be sort of false positives. So you might have all those things happening and it not be malicious insider, but it might just be something to look into.
And that's difficult because the normal you're talking about is no longer what we used to know as normal.
Absolutely.
That normal has changed.
Yes.
How would I know that I'm being used, that I'm a victim of someone else's attacks?
Yeah, so the first sort of bad news is that you might not know, and this is why it is so important to keep your devices up to date, to have good, more secure passwords, to use two-factor authentication, but also it's looking out for those kind of spear phishing emails. If you get an email with an attachment or a link that you're not expecting, pick up the phone and check, has that person really sent it? Read the email out loud. If you get an email that looks a little bit funny, read it out loud, and that's a way of just digesting the information in a more rational way. And doing things like that just heightens your awareness and makes you a bit better defended.
And what can the industry do to help individuals as well? Because I know when I get a phishing email, I tend to report it and forward it on. but I sometimes get an email back saying this email no longer works. You're thinking, oh God, I'm trying to report it here.
Yeah.
So what more could organisations do to help the individuals?
You've touched on something really important, which is having that avenue for people to report a suspected phishing email. And that might be a button, in all of your emails, which you can click to say, I suspect this is a phishing email. Partly that's useful because people like to click, they like to take an action. But having some kind of avenue so that people can report these things, that helps with your baseline of understanding what normal looks like, but also information sharing. So if we know what the attackers are doing, then we can better defend ourselves. And this is really crucial when it comes to bank security.
So the psychology and the sociology, and that's your background, it comes together beautifully, doesn't it, in your subject? So thank you so much for coming along to talk to us today. Thank you, Jessica.
So much. Thank you.
Dr. Jessica Parker there on the human factor in cybersecurity, speaking to us earlier. Something very interesting and very real and relevant at this point in time.
Absolutely.
Well, I'm sure we're all enjoying our stay here in one of North America's greatest cities, but what can you do outside of the convention center?
Well, as delegates here at Sibos, you're all proud owners of this golden Toronto key. Oh, he's got it on a chain now.
I put mine on it. One moves it this way. There you go.
A key that unlocks all sorts of treats and discounts, and who better to road test it than the head of Sibos, Sven Bossu.
Welcome to Sibos 2017. I've got my Toronto Pro guide, so let me take you on a whirlwind tour of some of the highlights. First stop is Ripley's Aquarium, which features North America's longest underwater viewing tunnel. So Amanda, what is Ripley's Aquarium about?
Ripley's Aquarium of Canada is all about the fish. We have over 20,000 animals on site, over 450 different species of fish. We have exhibits where you can actually touch a bamboo shark or get your nails cleaned by a cleaner shrimp. It's super fun and interactive, so really unique experience.
And a lot of people come to Sibos, they're a bit under time pressure, so what are the must-dos?
I definitely would highlight our Canadian Waters exhibit as well as our shark tunnel and just see, our jellies gallery and fish from all over the world. So definitely doable in 2 hours.
Well, thank you very much. I'm looking forward to my visit.
We're happy to have you.
Another must-see is the Hockey Hall of Fame, Canada's shrine to one of its most popular sports, ice hockey. Here you'll find memorabilia, interactive simulators, and the famous Stanley Cup Championship trophy. To say that Torontonians love hockey is an understatement. With the start of the new season, there's a great buzz in the air for the local team, Maple Leafs. In many ways, Toronto combines the best of North America and Europe. Nowhere is this better seen than in the Cluny Bistro and Boulangerie, a modern French-inspired restaurant with a twist. So, how would you describe Cluny's?
Cluny is a casual French-inspired restaurant in the Distillery District. We just try to have fun with food, be a little quirky, not take ourselves too seriously. It's a place where you can bring the whole family and just have fun and enjoy.
Of all the dishes, what are the dishes you would need to taste at Cluny's?
Being from East Coast of Canada, from Newfoundland, the salt water's in my veins. So we have the scallop crudo with the house-made fish puff. We have our wild Atlantic turbot served in the weeds, and then we also have a beautiful chilled tomato and melon soup served with shrimp.
Well, Chef, thank you very much. The bistro is located in the heart of the Distillery District, where you'll find lots of restaurants, including Pure Spirits Oyster House and Grill. Voted Toronto's top seafood restaurant in 2017, it's a great place for fish and oyster lovers to hang out and savor a great range of local beers. This is just one small taste of what is on offer in Toronto. I do hope you will have the time and discover it for yourself.
I'm thinking maybe later tonight, after we're done here, some places to go to. That brings us to the end of Good Morning Sibos for today.
If you'd like to learn more about the human and technical measures to better protect your organisation, we'll be covering Jessica's session Inside the Insider Threats, and that's from Conference Room 2, and that's going to start in just a few moments on SibosTV.
Well, thanks for watching. We're back with more guests and insights at 11:15 with Talking Sibos. We'll see you then.
See you.